Hi everyone, welcome back to our Histo-PH family, where forgotten Filipino history finally comes alive. Today we're diving deep into the secret Philippine Navy that existed before Spain, a story that rewrites everything we thought we knew about our beginnings. They told you Asia had one seafaring power, China. They were wrong. For over 700 years, the Philippines dominated trade routes worth millions in today's money, and nobody talks about it. Imagine this: 1400 Southeast Asia. A wooden boat cuts through tropical waters. 40 feet long, no nails, no metal, just wood pegged together with intricate joinery so perfect it survived shipwrecks for 500 years. On deck, not explorers, but traders. Not conquerors, but merchants who controlled the richest trade networks in the Indian Ocean. That boat is a Balangay, and it represents an entire civilization the world forgot. For centuries, we've been told the story of maritime dominance in Asia wrong. We learned about the treasure fleets of China, the Arab traders, the Indian Ocean routes. But there's a massive gap in that story, and it's shaped like an archipelago. The Philippines, before Spain ever set a compass toward it, was not a backwater of scattered islands. It was a maritime superpower, a naval civilization, an economic engine that connected the entire Indian Ocean world. Let me tell you how we know this is real. The evidence. Nobody questions. In 1976, archaeologists digging near the city of Butuan made a discovery that changed everything. They found a wooden shipwreck, not a Spanish galleon, not a Chinese junk. A Balangay buried in soil for over 500 years. This wasn't a myth. This wasn't a legend. This was a real ship, real wood, real craftsmanship. And when they carbon dated it, scientists confirmed this ship had been built and sailed in the 15th century, during the reign of the Ming dynasty, during the height of Jinghi's treasure fleets, while Europe was just beginning the age of exploration. The ship told a story buried under centuries of colonial silence. The Balangay wasn't primitive, it was engineered. The builders understood weight distribution, water displacement, and structural integrity. The hull was made from multiple pieces of wood, joined with wooden pegs in a technique so sophisticated that each piece locked into the next without a single nail. Shipwrights, who built European ships at the same time, were using nails and bolts. Balangay builders were using geometry and precision. The boat had double outriggers, curved wooden extensions that stabilized the hull in rough water. This design would become the template for the most successful sailing vessels in the Pacific for the next 400 years. The Balangay didn't just survive the waters of Southeast Asia, it conquered them. And whoever built the Balangay, they were the shipwrights of a maritime empire. If you're amazed by our ancestor story, the secret Philippine Navy that existed before Spain, help us hit our 500-like goal, drop a comment about your favorite fact, and subscribe to join the Histo-PH family. They were organized like a military. Here's what's crucial to understand. The Balangay boats don't appear randomly in the archaeological record. They appear in the ports of organized states. City-states, actually. Coastal kingdoms that controlled specific trade routes and taxed the merchants who moved through their waters. Butuan, where that ship was found, wasn't a small settlement. Archaeological evidence shows it was one of the largest and wealthiest ports in the archipelago. It had massive warehouses, evidence of large-scale trade, and a clear hierarchical system of governance. this wasn't accidental wealth. This was organized commerce. The Sulu Sultanate, which emerged later and controlled southern Philippines, had a formal navy. Spanish records, which are actually our only detailed written sources from this period, describe Sulu's naval forces as formidable enough to threaten Spanish galleons for 2 centuries after colonization. The Sulu weren't improvising that military capability in the 1600s. They inherited it. Tondo, near modern-day Manila, was a kingdom ruled by a datu with direct control over maritime trade. When Spanish colonizer Miguel López de Legazpi arrived in 1565, he didn't find fishermen. He found organized resistance. He found port authorities. He found a system. Maynila, the city the Spanish would rename Manila, was controlled by another datu and had established trade relationships with Brunei, Siam, and Chinese merchants. This wasn't random interaction. This was a formal trading bloc. The pattern repeats across the archipelago. Organized ports, organized fleets, organized trade networks, organized government, the trade empire that moved billions. Here's where it gets really interesting. The Philippines didn't just have boats. It had a reason for those boats. It was the middleman in the richest trade network in the world. Between 900 and 1600 CE, Southeast Asia was where wealth moved. Spices from the Moluccas, the real spice islands in modern-day Indonesia, couldn't reach Europe or China without passing through a gateway. Textiles from India, porcelain from China, silks from everywhere, gold from Luzon, spices from the south. All of it flowed through Philippine ports. The Philippine archipelago sits at the center of this world. Not to the side, not marginally, at the center. Butuan controlled the flow of goods from the eastern seas. Tondo controlled the Manila Bay, the safest harbor in the region. The southern sultanates controlled the Sulu Strait, the Mindanao Strait, the Celebes Sea, the passages that connected the Indian Ocean to the Pacific trade routes. To move spices from the Moluccas to China, you went through Philippine waters. To trade silks from India to Southeast Asia, you went through Philippine ports. Merchants paid taxes. They paid port fees. They paid for protection. And the Philippine maritime kingdoms became unimaginably wealthy. Chinese records from the Song dynasty, 960 to 1279, and Ming dynasty, 1368 to 1644, document Philippine ports as major trading destinations, not minor stops. Major destinations where Chinese merchants specifically traveled to conduct business. By the 15th century, Philippine ports were receiving Chinese junks on a regular basis. Trade records show goods from the Philippines reaching as far as Egypt. The economic value, if we calculate it in modern terms, the annual trade flowing through Philippine ports may have been worth millions of pesos annually. In today's currency, that's transformational wealth for a pre-industrial civilization. The naval organization they conquered with. But here's what makes this militarily significant. The Balangay boats in the ports weren't just for commerce, they were instruments of power. When Spanish arrived, they repeatedly noted that Philippine kingdoms could mobilize fleets, not one boat, multiple vessels, organized formations. In naval battles during the early colonization period, Sulu forces would coordinate multiple boats in combat. That coordination doesn't emerge from thin air. That's inherited military doctrine. Datu Puti, the legendary founder of several Philippine kingdoms, is described in Spanish records as having arrived with multiple boats and organized followers. Whether the legend is historically precise or not, it reflects a cultural memory of leadership through naval organization, of power exercised through controlled fleets. The Balangay design itself was optimized for organized maritime warfare. The double outriggers made it stable enough to carry warriors and weapons. The sleek hull made it fast. A fleet of 10 Balangays, properly coordinated, could control sea lanes for hundreds of kilometers. And the evidence suggests Philippine maritime kingdoms had exactly these kinds of fleets. Spanish sources document that when they tried to suppress piracy from Sulu and Mindanao in the 1600s and 1700s, they faced a coordinated naval opposition. Spanish galleons were larger and carried more firepower, but the Sulu boats were faster, more maneuverable, and deployed in coordinated groups. For over 200 years, despite having superior technology, Spain never fully subdued these naval forces. That wasn't primitive improvisation. That was institutional military knowledge passed down through generations. The connections that linked them to everything. What's remarkable is that Philippine maritime kingdoms weren't isolated. They were actively connected to the broader Asian world. Butuan had direct trading relationships with Champa, modern Vietnam, with kingdoms in Borneo, with the Srivijaya kingdom, and with China. The Chinese imperial records specifically call out Mai, likely Manila/Maynila, and Butuan as regular trading partners. These aren't vague references. These are names recorded in official imperial documents. The Sulu Sultanate, which had formal relationships with the Brunei Sultanate and received goods from as far as the Ottoman Empire through Islamic trade networks, was recognized as a legitimate power by neighboring sultanates and kingdoms. It wasn't treated as a backwater, it was treated as a peer. The arrival of Islam in the southern Philippines, 14th to 15th centuries, didn't destroy the maritime civilization. It transformed it. The conversion of southern Philippines to Islam happened because Islamic traders were successful and prestigious. Becoming Islamic meant joining a global commercial and diplomatic network. Southern Philippine maritime kingdoms recognized that joining the Islamic world expanded their economic and political reach. That's not the decision of isolated people. That's the strategic calculation of organized states. The wealth they accumulated. Archaeological evidence and Spanish records show that Philippine maritime kingdoms accumulated serious wealth, not regional wealth, global standard wealth for the era. Luzon alone was a major gold producer. Gold from Philippine mines reached China, Japan, and beyond. This wasn't artisanal gold panning. This was organized mining with enough output to matter in international trade. Combined with the tax revenues from maritime trade, Philippine datus and Rajas controlled comparable wealth to the rulers of Siam or Vietnam. Grave goods from pre-colonial Philippine archaeological sites show objects of extraordinary value. Finely worked gold, precious stones, imported ceramics from China, textiles. These weren't the possessions of subsistence farmers. These were the possessions of people integrated into a wealthy, organized trading civilization. Spanish conquistador accounts repeatedly mention surprise at the wealth and sophistication they found. Legazpi's own reports describe gold ornaments, organized trade systems, and clearly defined territories governed by recognized authorities. He wasn't conquering savages. He was conquering merchant princes. He knew it. His contemporaries knew it. Only later, historians pretended otherwise. What this means for understanding power. This history matters because it challenges a fundamental wrong assumption that non-European societies were primitive until Europeans arrived to civilize them. The Philippines wasn't technologically identical to Europe. Balangay boats used wood joinery, where European boats used nails. But that wasn't primitive. That was different, advanced, adapted to tropical conditions in ways European ships weren't. The Philippines didn't have centralized nation-states in 1500 CE, but it had organized port cities, regional kingdoms, formal trade networks, and recognized authorities. That's sophisticated political organization. Not identical to European systems, but not primitive. The Philippines wasn't isolated. It was connected to global trade networks. Merchants from Philippines worked with Chinese, Arab, Indian, and Southeast Asian traders as equals. When the Sulu Sultanate later negotiated treaties with Spain, it negotiated as a sovereign power, not as conquered subjects. What happened to the Philippines wasn't inevitable. It was contingent on European naval technology, cannons, temporarily outpacing Southeast Asian technology. Had the Balangay been designed with gun ports a century earlier, had Philippine kingdoms invested in gunpowder earlier, the history would have been completely different.